My next speaker is George Henry from Transport Scotland. They've been doing quite a bit of work around road safety and cultural maturity, and we're going to have a presentation on what they've been up to. So, George, are you on the line?
I am here, Jamie.
Brilliant. Do we have your slides ready?
Yes, they should be there. I think that they look slightly different from what I'd sent, but I don't know if it's just the templates and the way that they've been transferred over. So hopefully everything should be fine. Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I'm George Henry. I'm Head of Road Policy and Safety at Transport Scotland, the Scottish Government. Essentially, what that means is I was responsible for seeing out the road safety framework to 2020 and developing our new framework to 2030. I also look after all the publicity and education work around road safety, as well as every other road policy. So quite a wide-ranging remit. I wanted to kind of set the scene today about the work that we've been doing since obviously developing and publishing our road safety framework. A few of the challenges that we've faced within that. Always prefer to be very open and honest in these conversations and presentations that we do, but also then setting aside the kind of the work that we're doing around changing culture in Scotland. Next slide, please. So our road safety framework is very much based around the safe system approach, which is you'll have heard and fully aware that is deemed as international best practice. Our road safety framework was developed with our key road safety community and stakeholders. We wanted it to have a clear and world-leading vision for Scotland to have the best road safety performance in the world by 2030. Scotland's had quite a rich history in terms of road safety performance, and it was kind of important that we continued on that journey of ambition, and that's certainly where this framework wishes to take us. It's supported by a long-term goal of Vision Zero, where nobody is killed or seriously injured on our roads by 2050. It has 5 strategic outcomes within the framework, which is based around the components of the safe system. Next slide, please. But it was important that I think that, you know, road safety, because of that kind of rich history that we've had. My following programs have just going to shut down on me. Can everybody still hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, we've still got you.
All right, my Outlook and Word has just shut down totally on my face there. Sorry, apologies. Okay, so there's a hand raised. Is someone wanting to come in, or is that a legacy? We'll continue on. Anyway, because of our performance in terms of road safety, we've probably been a bit of a victim of our own success over the years, I think, collectively. And it was important that we raised the profile of road safety and aligned with the government's national outcomes and indicators. So the graphic on the right-hand side, when we talk about the climate change targets that Scotland has, our ambitions around active and sustainable travel, how it aligns with our national transport strategy, as well as the Strategic Transport Projects Review, which outlines where all the major road safety investment in Scotland will happen over the coming decades. It's very important that road safety plays a fundamental part in those. And as well as when you look a bit further afield of our health, justice, education strategies, our planning framework, and the place principles, road safety is at the heart of every single one of those. But collectively, we all need to be doing more in terms of road safety. And historically, it's always been about what road safety could do for other areas. But the road safety framework is pretty much flipping that on its head to ensure that it's what these other areas can do for road safety as well. Next slide, please. So when we went to consultation, we consulted on 10 strategic actions, and we took on board the comments that were raised through the consultation, and we drew out 2 more strategic actions around engineering and inequalities. The inequalities bit is because the Scottish Government is very focused on reducing inequalities, and particularly child poverty. And we know that you're 3 times more likely to be involved in a road collision if you live in an area of deprivation. So hence the reason why we wanted to kind of focus in on that a bit more. I'll not have time to go through all the 12 strategic actions, but you can see that they cover the kind of wide range of road safety. And one of the big important things for us was to kind of focus on our relationships in some of the other areas, such as public health and education, etc. With that. These strategic actions are delivered through individual initiatives from a wide range of partners through our annual delivery plan. Next slide, please. So the framework sets out that long-term vision to 2050, and the journey to achieving that includes intermediate targets, interim targets, where the number of people being killed or seriously injured on our roads will be halved by 2050, and children being killed or seriously injured by 60% by 2030. For the first time, mode and user specific targets have been created. So we've got a full suite of those that focuses on our key priority areas around pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, overrepresented age groups, young and old. And that is really to kind of focus partners on what we should be delivering on. And if we can achieve all of these intermediate outcome targets, then the interim targets to 2030 will look after themselves. But there is a lot of intermediate measures and key performance indicators that are monitored through our governance groups. Next slide, please. The last road safety framework had 2 tiers of governance, a strategic partnership board and an operational partnership group. The SPB is made up of heads of emergency services, local authorities, as well as chaired by our Cabinet Secretary for Transport. The Operational Partnership Group had its membership revised, with affiliate members joining to discuss pertinent issues. So we've got active travel groups, motoring groups, insurance industry, public health, etc., all around the table. But when I joined, I'm maybe slightly embarrassed to say so at the moment, is that when I joined, I asked the team what was getting done at the local level. And I probably wasn't too content with the response that I received back from that. So it was important that we introduced a new tier of governance, which is the 3rd tier, which is local partnership forums. They were there and introduced to improve communication between the national and local level, but also to work alongside existing road safety groups to share best practice, disseminate information across the country. Excuse me, and there is a number of key priority groups that relate back to the kind of mode and user specific targets. But when we were developing the framework, we had a review of the kind of knowledge and skills of the partners as we kind of moved through, particularly with their safe system knowledge. Next slide, please. And that threw up a few challenges. The first challenge being that when we developed and published this framework, we ended up in a pandemic, and that was followed by a cost of living crisis. And when we undertook organisational and partner analysis around the kind of safe system knowledge, nobody really knew what the safe system approach actually meant. Yes, it explained the theory and the principles within the document itself, but it's how do you actually get that organisational change? How do you get people to actually properly deliver the safe system? And we knew that the Scandinavians had been doing it for many years, and I don't know if it's a societal thing, but when we asked them, it seemed to kind of just happen for them, and that people changed, whereas I wasn't too probably convinced that that would happen in Scotland. We also reached out to academics, and sure, there was a lot of safe system manuals out there which kind of tell you about the theory and the principles, but I was looking for something more that would actually tell you how to implement and how people could pick it up. And I always revert back to doing my own road safety engineering training back in the day with ROSPA, and you went away with that kind of ROSPA manual that you could always revert back to. Next slide, please. So when we looked at the kind of partner organisations, there was a lot of changes that had been occurring probably over the last decade or so around budget and resources. Also, a lot of organisations had slimmed down in terms of size. So maybe where you had a specific road safety team with specialisms contained within that, that had kind of gone. A lot of people had retired, and the kind of change within Scotland around practitioners was clear to see. There was also restrictions on government spending, on the back of the pandemic and stuff. And what we'd found is that partners were really kind of nervous around the challenge that they faced and the way of delivering, and probably their lack of knowledge of how to do that. And it was always coupled. That was also coupled with a decline in road safety performance. After the pandemic, with vehicles being off our roads, as people return to our roads, we've seen a rise in fatalities that is certainly unwelcomed, and we're trying to kind of address that. Next slide, please. So it was really important to me that to identify that we needed cultural change in the way that we thought around road safety. I think that when people die on our roads, the first thing that people kind of tend to think is probably not around the impacts it has on the individual and their families and friends, etc., but more around when's the road going to be back open and they can get back around their kind of their daily lives. And we had an unfortunate incident on the rail network in the northeast of Scotland where 3 people lost their lives due to a landslide and a train derailment. And there was kind of minute silence for these people and train stations all across the country, and it really got me thinking around the kind of way that we're thinking around road safety, and we really need to change the hearts and minds of people. Next slide, please. So I think that when you looked at the practitioners and the way that we were delivering in Scotland, it was very important that we understood the model and that we kind of educated and invested in the people delivering road safety within Scotland. So yes, we know that people will make mistakes and that humans are vulnerable to injury, and that death and serious injury is unacceptable, and that's backed up through our road safety framework. As well as responsibility being shared and our approach needing to be proactive, but our actions needed to be systematic. And that was something that I think that from an approach around being proactive and being systematic within our actions is something that we certainly needed to improve on. Next slide, please. So we worked with Agilicis through a road safety framework funded project to undertake more detailed analysis around our system operators. And that was kind of ranking them through to see how they were in terms of embedding the safe system approach. So whether that was vulnerable through to advanced, and then scoring them across a range of areas that you can see on the right hand side from, and then identifying if they're pathological, degenerative in certain areas. And that was something that we really wanted to kind of home in on. So there was a questionnaire done with a range of questions that would allow them to be ranked depending on their answers. Next slide, please. And through the Road Safety Framework funded project, we developed the cultural maturity playbook for the safe system. And this playbook is a global first for any roads authority. And it introduces a new approach to investing in the kind of culture that will support our overall road safety ambitions. And it's called a playbook rather than a strategy, because we already have a strategy, but also to reflect the dynamic nature of how we need to influence culture in the way that we change our country going forward. It's a creative approach that needs to balance both our ambitions of where we want to get to, but also have the flexibility of how we actually get there. And it includes a set of guiding principles and a collection of tools and techniques for all the organisations to develop that right sort of culture and become increasingly mature in the way that we deliver safe system within Scotland. And it aims to provide enough structure to allow them to be creative but also enough constraint to avoid wasting effort and resource. I think that there's so much of that that, you know, so many people do the same things that they've always done. And if you do that, you're always going to get the same results or less. So therefore, it ends up that you're not going to get the results that we need to get that 50 and 60% reduction by 2030. Next slide, please. So I think that many will be familiar with ISM models, and when we look at behaviour change, a lot of the focus tends to go in on the individual and who we're trying to kind of fix, but not necessarily looking at the kind of social material aspects of that as well. And that was something that with Agilysys, development of the cultural maturity model, that through the kind of construction element, that if our beliefs, attitudes and values and rules are all there and at the heart, and the way that we apply it and the way that our roles and the way that we undertake our work, the language and the kind of symbols that we use, and then from an operational perspective, that if we do all the parts around the outside of that model, then we will become more culturally mature in the way that we kind of roll out safe system. Next slide, please. We wanted to keep it simple, so it was kept simple with 4 plays, effectively our ABCD of developing culture in Scotland. So A for advocacy, and that we build, support and actively champion our culture ambitions by working alongside partner organisations who have similar ambitions to meet the targets with us, and kind of really want to kind of push that kind of road safety message. And B for behaviour is embedding those custom practices to ensure that we can express our desired culture going forward. But it's also important for the C, as standing for communication, that we develop that shared vocabulary and ensure clarity of purpose. And I always revert back to working with certain local authorities, and when they talk about, oh, we're doing accident investigation and prevention measures, and even my director referring to the kind of 4Es, etc. And I'm not saying that any of those are specifically wrong, but it's fundamentally not the safe system vocabulary that we want to be using. So we need to provide that clarity of purpose and why we are describing things in the way that we are, to get people to understand where we want to go. And particularly D for design, it's very important that we reinforce our aspirations through images and the symbols that we use, so that we're consistent in everything that we do and trying to kind of improve that culture through our delivery. Next slide, please. So yes, we've got our vision, our strategy and our governance in place, but it was important that we needed to obviously develop the individuals who were delivering for us. So that professional development and training was really important. And through that kind of developing awareness across the kind of our organisations, it allows them to kind of leverage for more funding going forward. And that as we plan through our interventions and our delivery and promote innovations, then it allows us to build momentum as we go forward. But it's also really important that as we do that, we are consistently analysing and performance managing not only our organisations, but everything that we are doing to ensure that we're getting the desired delivery and the positive change through that delivery. Next slide, please. So the 5 steps that we're kind of been on, we're very much between 2 and 3 at this present moment in time, in terms of that we've developed and published a playbook. We've got a host of training that has started with our kind of individual organisations and going forward and mapping out that framework for that. And we're also developing the world's first safe system manual for practitioners. So something that whoever comes into working in road safety, that there is training there for them to get up to speed on safe system, but there's also a manual that they can revert back to tell them how to deliver. And as we do that and move through the process, it's also important that we continue that performance analysis. And developing a safe system data catalog is the next kind of step for us, because it's really important that we continue to do that, and knowing that all the data out there and the evidence that's there, that we are using that in the best way, and that we continue to develop and implement our training programs. Next slide, please. So in Scotland, the foundations have been laid for us to kind of really deliver. This year, we're delivering national training to 500 partners between now and the summer, and that's a mix between in-person and online learning that's blended between full days and half days, or kind of specific sessions depending on the role that you play within the system. So whether you're a policy maker, a marketeer, an educator, an engineer, an operating company, a local authority, emergency service, they're all contained in there with specific training that kind of suits their needs in the way that we move forward. Also, MSPs in the Scottish Parliament will be offered a tailored training course on Safe System, particularly for them, and we really feel that the development of our first Safe System manual for practitioners is going to be a real step in us delivering Safe System and really changing the way that we are thinking around road safety within our country, and particularly changing that culture to ensure that we move forward in the way that we wish to achieve our ambitions of 2030 and 2050. No matter how hard they'll be, we are absolutely committed fully to doing that. Next slide. I think, Jamie, that's it for me. Obviously a bit of a whistle-stop tour of where we are in terms of road safety, and I will be around to sit on the panel later if there's any questions, if we've not got time just now.